Before we get started today, I did a video a while ago on the origin of the word coach. Feel free to check it out. It's going to be down in the description box below. I'm also going to have the link pop up here somewhere. Well, anyway, today I want to give a huge shout out to Dennis Bodo, who actually went to the town of Koch in Hungary, where the first coach originated. He got a selfie next to the coach sign after watching one of my videos. Dennis, as promised, your free Motorcoach World t-shirt is on its way to you. Thank you so much for the picture. Hope you had a good time in Koch, Hungary. Also, folks, just a heads up, I try to release my videos weekly on Wednesdays. Sometimes I don't succeed, but most of the times I do. I definitely make an effort to. However, there is a holiday coming up on July the 4th, and I may or may not release content for that week. Not quite sure yet on that, but I definitely want to make sure I spend some quality family time during the holidays. So if you guys don't see any Motorcoach World content for a week or so, no worries, don't panic. I'm just taking some time off to spend with my family on the holidays. With that said, let's roll that intro so we can get started with today's video. Hey, what is going on, all you bus nuts, geeks, and enthusiasts out there? Welcome to another episode of Motorcoach World. My name is James, and happy Father's Day, everyone. In my 37 years of existence on this world, I've had many best day of my life moments. Let's see, seeing my first Star Trek movie in the theaters. I think that was back in 1996 when Star Trek First Contact came out. Getting married to my beautiful wife. Bringing my first child into the world. Going to my first Star Trek convention with my wife, which led to us having our second child 9 months later. Anyway, the one fond memory that I'm leading up to for today's video is the day I got my CDL and saw my name assigned to a bus and the trip. The day I joined the ranks of being a motor coach operator. It was an overwhelming moment of excitement and terror. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had gone through all the training, passed all of my tests, and had hours of road time behind the wheel of a motor coach with an instructor prior. But still, I was 22 years old. It was my first trip out, and there were 50 people depending on me to wield that giant 45-foot coach bus safely and professionally to their destination, hundreds of miles away. Being my first trip, I wanted to make sure I did everything right, as well as be prepared. So that's what I did. I prepared a lot, like overboard.
He's just taking his duties very seriously, that's all.
I spent the 2 days before my trip memorizing the route so that I could read it to myself in my sleep. Then I memorized the 3 contingency routes I made for the way there and the 4 on my way back. Now, since that day 15 years ago, I've carried thousands of different groups to thousands of different destinations, but none of them sticks out as significantly as that first trip. Well, in the end, it went really well, actually. A very smooth trip with a very satisfied group. In fact, a few days after the trip, I remember that I got a compliment from a manager saying that the group mentioned how young I looked for being such an experienced and professional coach driver. Little do they know, they were my first passengers ever on a bus. Now, I know some of the viewers get very upset with me when I start my videos with a story.
Too bad.
But there is a point to all of this. You see, I learned something very important on that very first trip of mine that has served me well throughout my career as a motor coach operator. It always pays to be prepared. Okay, well, maybe not to the point I took it to. But in this case, it's always better to overdo it than to underdo it. Trust me, your passengers will thank you for it, and you'll thank yourself for it when you get yourself into a bind. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the things a professional motor coach operator should do to prepare for a charter trip. Every motor coach company dispatches their drivers differently. Some companies call their driver for upcoming trips months in advance, letting the drivers manage their own calendar and relying on the drivers to be aware of their upcoming trips. Some companies hand out trip assignments 4 to 5 days before the actual trip, like we do here, and some within 24 hours or less of the trip. But regardless of the leeway, it's up to the driver to know where they're going come the day of their trip. Drivers are the last line of defense when it comes down to making sure their trip runs smoothly and their passengers are happy when they get off the coach at the end of the day. Sometimes booking agents could be having a bad day and make a mistake on the pickup address. Sometimes a fleet coordinator may have assigned the wrong bus for the trip that required a wheelchair lift. Sometimes dispatch makes mistakes and could have misread a driver report time and informed the driver incorrectly of when he or she needs to show up to the pre-trip. And sometimes the passengers themselves could have submitted an itinerary that is impossible to achieve. Now, I'm not saying it's up to the driver that all these things are done right. In the end, each department is responsible for their part of the puzzle. And in a perfect world, no one will ever make mistakes. But we do not live in a perfect world, and a well-prepared motor coach operator should always be aware of this in the back of their mind. As soon as I get a trip assignment, I always make sure that I have all the addresses of the pickup and destinations. And I look them up on Google Maps to make sure that the places exist. I always make sure that my coach is the right one for the job and that the times on my itinerary are realistic and that I will have enough hours legally to do everything that is being asked of me to do on the itinerary. At the end of the day, if a mistake was made by someone along the trip planning process, no matter who dropped the ball, I as the driver will suffer for it if no one catches it. It never hurts to double check everyone else's work, especially if you're in the driver's seat. And as a driver, if you do catch a mistake that could have resulted in a group missing their flight at the airport, you could come out looking like a hero.
Nicely done.
Motor coach operators don't have the luxury of driving their buses from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Most of the time, they drive at odd hours of the night to get to a pickup location just in time for their passengers to have finished eating their breakfast and are ready to go. Sometimes motor coach operators will be asked to drive a trip that involves all-night driving one day, and then 2 days later asked to drive a long trip that goes throughout the day. This results in completely throwing off the sleep schedule or circadian rhythm of the driver. Now, situations like these are not ideal, and most safely run coach bus companies will try their best to avoid putting a driver through this type of schedule. But during peak travel seasons, as well as if the company is having a driver shortage, things like this do tend to happen. The point is, as a coach bus operator, always make sure you're able to get enough sleep. Now, that isn't as easy as it sounds. For example, when I first became a motor coach operator, I didn't know that my body doesn't sleep well in different environments like hotel rooms. It took me a while to realize on trips that involved me staying overnight at a hotel that I'd better do something to make sure I don't have a restless night before a day where I'm required to drive 8 hours with a group of passengers. I learned to anticipate my sleeping needs, so I always keep melatonin in my driver's bag because I know it always works to put me to sleep no matter where I am and what time of the day it is. I also had to learn how long it takes before the melatonin takes effect, so I always make sure to take it just at the right time in order to get at least 6 hours of sleep. Now, for all of you new drivers out there watching this video, please don't start popping sleeping pills willy-nilly. The point is, as a motor coach driver, you will really have to start learning how your body reacts to sleeping in different conditions and coming up with techniques that will do the trick when it comes to successfully knocking yourself out. Learn what works for you and anticipate when you have to utilize your technique to making yourself sleep. Sometimes this means even in your own bed at home if you have to go to sleep for a trip that goes through the night, but your spouse and kids are up and about making a ruckus.
Are you gonna talk all night? Let me sleep.
90% of the time, the passengers that chartered your coach did not have the size and clearance height of your bus in mind when they planned out their itinerary. Pickup locations, meal stops, and drop-off points may have worked out for them when they were there in their Toyota Sienna.
I roll hard through the streets and the cul-de-sac.
But coach buses are a lot bigger than minivans, and it's your job as the operator to make sure that your bus is gonna fit in every place your passengers want to go to. Google Maps and Google Earth is always my go-to tool to route out my approach and departures to pickup locations, meal stops, and destinations, as well as parking options for when I'm waiting for the group. Usually while routing out my trips, I always use satellite view to see if there are any bridges or viaducts that I have to go under after exiting the interstate. Now, all overpasses on interstates are built to accommodate the height of coach buses and semi-trucks, but on local city streets, they kind of make me nervous. So if I see that I have to pass under an overpass on a local road in a city I've never been to before, I always try to zoom into Street View to see if I can catch an image of a clearance sign on that bridge. Now, if the Street View does not show any clearance signs or it's kind of blurred out, I look around at different angles to see if there are any shots of semi-trucks that have gone underneath it. If so, I know that my bus will be just fine as well as far as fitting underneath the bridge. Now, with that said, it's very important not to use a school bus or city transit bus as a clearance reference for a bridge or viaduct. They tend to have much lower clearance heights than coach buses. Now, one other thing I also pay attention to when using Street View on Google Maps is the date of the street picture. It's usually shown on the lower right corner, and if the Street View pic is really outdated, like more than 5 years old, I'll typically not rely on it for my routing. Remember, if all else fails, ask a manager or another experienced motor coach driver. 9 times out of 10, another coach operator has done that trip before. Oh, and if you work for a bus company where the managers and supervisors just brush you off when you come to them for routing advice, don't work there. Managers and supervisors should always go out of their way to assist new drivers or any drivers when they need help. Now, that's assuming that you've put some effort into it already and you're not just trying to offload your homework on them every time. Because if that's the case, I'd probably tell you to go do your homework first. Today, with all the different technologies and tools that are available for drivers, like the aforementioned Google Maps, as well as Waze, and even Garmin units, getting from point A to point B has never been easier. But there's a huge caveat to having all this technology available to us. We become too reliant on them. A professional driver should always be able to read a paper map, as well as be able to get their passengers to where they are going without any electronic aids.
No computers, just the wind and the sea, the stars to guide you.
Before going on any charter trips, I always make sure I know how to get to each one of my stops by memory. I also write down turn-by-turn directions on a notepad just in case. Garmin's and navigation apps on phones are nice, but I never solely rely on them. Instead, I use them as a supplement to help me get to where I'm going. Aside from the obvious reason that they may fail on you and the fact that there may not be satellite or cellular coverage where you're at, modern-day smartphones and GPS systems are kind of dumb when it comes to the need of charter bus. One of the many things a coach bus driver has to think about that most people don't consider is, will the door of my bus be on the right side of the road when I get there? Just because Google Maps got you to the restaurant your passengers wanted to go to, you don't want your guests to have to cross a street when you drop them off. A Garmin unit or Google Maps simply won't think of that when it comes to calculating your route for you. In some cases, your GPS system may tell you to do a U-turn.
In 100 feet, do a U-turn.
And if you should miss your turn, your GPS unit may reroute you through residential streets that were not designed to accommodate a 45-foot coach bus, leaving you stuck in a hairy situation with 50 sets of eyes staring at the back of your neck, waiting to see how you'll professionally drive yourself out of this one. Also, some destinations are massive with multiple possible drop-off locations like sports stadiums or giant international airports. Sure, you can simply shout out a command like, "Navigate me to O'Hare International Airport," but doing so will result in your GPS trying to navigate you onto Taxi Lane Charlie outside of boarding gate C25, which could lead to misunderstandings with airport security. So if being surrounded by armed border agents at gunpoint isn't your idea of how you want to finish your charter trip, then I would highly recommend that you do your homework on where you need to get your group to before you simply hop in your bus and take off. And finally, there's nothing more unprofessional than a charter bus driver turning around to their passengers and asking, "Hey, how do I get there?"
Something's very wrong. According to the navigational computer, we're over 200 light years from our last position.
Now, something I like to do the day before the trip is to call the designated group leader on my driver's manifest to introduce myself. Now, keep in mind that some companies do not allow drivers to contact their clients directly before the trip. Some companies do not require a group to designate a group leader, nor ask for their contact information. Pure Charter always asks any groups chartering with us to designate a group leader and provide a cell phone number so that our drivers, as well as our staff, have a point of contact. Now, before calling, I always make sure that it's an appropriate hour of the day to do so. I'll usually introduce myself as the driver for their trip the next day, as well as give them my contact number in case anything should change in short notice, while advising them to always contact the main company number to make any changes to their trip. I always like to inform the group leader of the route that I chose and the interstates I'll be taking to get them to their destination, as well as ask them if they have any preferences of their own. I'll then go over all the pickup and destination times and mention any possible delays due to weather or construction. It's a good way to break the ice before meeting in person so that the trip can start off with a familiar voice for them as well as yourself. It's also a good way to weed out any errors on the itinerary that had been overlooked. Now keep in mind, as a charter bus driver, I don't always have the time and luxury to perform some of these steps I listed in this video. Sometimes when doing back-to-back trips, leaving me only 9 hours of rest before my next trip, there's no way I can do all of these things. Now, if available, I always try to take advantage of my down times while I'm on a trip to plan for my next trip. At the very minimum, I'll always make sure that I know where I'm going on my next trip as far as approach and departure from each of my stops on my itinerary. Now, for all of you seasoned motorcoach operators out there, if you can think of anything I missed or something that you would do differently, I want to hear all about it down in the comments down below or on Motorcoach World's new Facebook page, facebook.com/Motorcoach World. And folks, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed watching the video. If you're watching this, you are part of the Motorcoach World.